Welcome to your Essential Small Group. We are excited to begin this journey through the book of Exodus, which we'll be doing for the next 10 weeks. And as we begin to look at Exodus, Malone, I'd love just to hear a couple comments about how we should approach this book in the Old Testament.
Well, we got together as clergy before deciding to film this, and it's really not just Exodus. When you come to Scripture, everybody brings their own histories, the things they've studied, and their lenses. Just as we have 4 Gospels, Marjorie was pointing this out to us earlier, and the Gospels each speak to different aspects of their understanding of who Jesus is and the implications of salvation. So we all bring those sorts of things when we read Scripture. So to think that everybody's going to come away with this one uniform way of thinking about things, and that's the correct way of thinking, is a ditch we don't want to fall into. But it's an easy one to fall into, that there can only be one kind of way to see things. So I really wanted us to open up with Exodus because, as with any book in the Bible, through your conversations, this is how we really engage Scriptures in community and unfolding these things as it speaks to us and it speaks to one another. So that's why I thought it was important to kind of start with that, so that as we begin this journey, we're going to realize there are different things said.
Yeah. And I do think it's important as we think about engaging the Scriptures in community, as our goal is relationship. It's not just to master a bunch of facts about Exodus, but asking how do these passages, how does this book lead us into deeper relationship with our God?
Yeah. So. Great.
All right, so let's begin. And first question for you, Malone, is how does the journey of Exodus start? Where do we find ourselves as we begin this book?
Yeah, so as the beginning of Exodus, you're going to quickly see that there's a problem for the 2 main players here, Egypt and Israel. From the Egyptian point of view, you know that the Israelites have come down and settled in Egypt. For Egypt, there's too many Israelites, and they're multiplying, and if you get too many people on your hands, the possibility is they might rebel. And so Egypt is faced with this problem, and they begin to unfold a few solutions to this. First is enslavement. They enslave the Israelites. And we see that as far as trying to control the population, that doesn't work. You're going to read in this opening chapter in verse 12 that, in fact, they multiplied, the Israelites did, and spread. So enslavement to try to control this issue did not work for them. In fact, it backfired. Well, one of the things we're going to glean from that is this proliferation is a sign of God's favor, that even in the midst of this struggle, God's favor is on His people, and that things get worse for the Egyptians, but God's favor is going to be an implication through the entire book as we journey. Well, the second thing the Egyptians turn to is asking the midwives to kill the male children when they're born, and that doesn't work. So finally, they're left with throwing the male children into the Nile River to drown them. And one of the reasons they specify the male children is they're the ones who would go to war. And so Egypt has this problem, and they're turning to violent means to execute it. Israel's reality, on the other hand, is that they're enslaved and they're under threat. And their solution, as we begin in this chapter, is Moses. Moses is going to be called to deliver his people from Egyptian slavery. That's where we begin this story.
You talked about some themes that we meet here in the first couple chapters of Exodus that then develop throughout the rest of the book. Is there one theme in particular that jumps out at you?
Well, covenant, again, which is a word you are familiar with, I suppose, is going to come front and center. And covenant, again, is relational. It's not merely a contract. Covenant is about the establishment of relationship, and that God will never leave or forsake His people. And we're going to get that through Exodus. And that's why Moses comes on the scene, is he will not leave his people. Interestingly, as it relates to Moses here, in his story of being pulled out of the river, it's going to make us think of another covenant perhaps, and that's the covenant with Noah. This story of Moses being pulled out of the Nile, you'll see that he's in a papyrus basket, which is lined with bitumen and pitch. And the word for this basket is rare in Hebrew. It's only used a couple of times, but it's used here and it's used way back in the flood story to describe the ark. And so in this covenant, Moses is like another Noah. Deliverance from a watery threat. He's delivered from the drowning in the Nile, and there's a new beginning for God's people. And as we move forward into the story, chapters 14 and 15, we're going to see where water comes into the picture again.
And I guess that also makes us think about our own covenant with God through Christ.
Absolutely. As I was thinking about this, I can't help but think of baptism. And there's a myriad of things that the waters of baptism represent, but one of them is the waters of death, which again, the Nile is representing for the Hebrews here, and in Noah's time there was death, and we are immersed into the waters of death, but come out because of what Christ has done for us. Probably the ultimate illustration and act of God's covenant, that he'll never leave us or forsake us, is that he brings us back even from the grave through resurrection.
Any other final thoughts about covenant or the chapter, or are we ready to
I
dive
think we're ready
as
to
groups?
dive in.
Wonderful. Well, we hope you enjoy your conversation, and we look forward to seeing you next week.